Welcome to the React Native Radio Podcast, brought to you by Infinite Red. Episode 174, The Relaunch.
Hey everyone, welcome to the brand new, relaunched, rebranded, and reignited React Native Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Jamin Holmgren, and with me today are three awesome co-hosts. I'll introduce them. Robin Heinz. How you doing, Robin?
I'm doing great, Jamin. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And we have Aditi Ravichandran. How are you doing, Aditi?
Doing well, Jamin.
Great. And last but not least, of course, we have Harris Robin Kalash. How you doing, Harris?
I'm doing good. Thanks.
First off, let me just kind of talk a little bit. Let's talk about our backgrounds a little bit for the audience who may not have heard us. If my voice sounds familiar, that may be because I was a host for a little while in January of React Native Radio. For those who haven't heard my story, I started coding when I was 12. I started doing some QBasic. I made little games and stuff like that. I've always been fascinated by computers. And a math teacher in middle school recognized this and gave me a book and said, "Hey, Jamin, here's a book on BASIC." She kind of understood that, okay, he likes computers. Maybe this would be a direction he could go. Very, very insightful, I guess. And so I started making little Mad Libs and things like that. And then all through high school, I was making little games in QBasic and exploring. I did a little bit of C++. My parents didn't understand it at all. They were, very working class kind of backgrounds, but where I grew up in Northwest coastal Oregon. But they tried to support me how they could. And then after high school, I went to college for a semester and decided it wasn't really for me. And kind of bounced around to different jobs for a while. I did construction. My dad owned an excavation company. I did a few different things, including home design and remodel design, which was kind of a fun thing. And then at a certain point, then I decided, you know what? I'd really love to own my own business. And that was around 2005. I was 23. And so I quit my job and I started a business building websites. And so I already kind of knew how to code, but I didn't know PHP. I didn't really know much about HTML or CSS. Well, CSS back in those days was pretty minimal anyway. So I bought a couple books. One was a PHP and MySQL book, and the other one was a JavaScript book. And I started coding, and I built some websites. I built one for my church. I built one for some other entrepreneurs who knew my dad in the construction industry. And over time, I think I went about 4 years, and then I started getting big enough, having enough clients that I needed to hire some people. So in 2009, I started hiring a few junior developers. I mean, technically, I was still kind of junior, even though I'd been coding for a long time. This was, I'd only been doing it professionally for a few years. But I hired some people who had even less experience, and some of them are with me still today at Infinite Red, which is kind of fun. Taught them to code. And in 2012, I got into open source. So we had started doing Ruby on Rails. And of course, Ruby is a big open source community. And I had some projects that I needed to do. So I needed to, use some open source libraries. And I started contributing back, and it was really fun. And that's how I ended up meeting my future current business partners, Todd Worth and Gant Laborde. And so we were doing a lot of Ruby. We were doing a technology called Ruby Motion, which was iOS and then later Android development. In 2015, we decided, since we had been doing all this open source together and we seemed to have a really a good vibe, we decided to merge our businesses together. And that became Infinite Red in 2015. We also made a few other big changes. One big one was that we went away from Ruby Motion for mobile apps and went into React Native. And so that was a fun change. And over time, I started doing more open source in the React Native side. We built a library called Ignite. We built a debugging package. We're going to probably talk about all these things. And I know I've talked about it on this podcast before in the previous iteration, Reactitron as well. And then I got a chance, I think it was last year, possibly, I think it was last year, to join the React Native core team specifically working on WebView, which I then extracted into its own package and worked on the React Native community organization and stuff like that. Still involved in the React Native core team to this day. I do some other things too. My official title is CTO at Infinite Red, and I can talk more about stuff that we do over there later on in the podcast. But a lot of open source, a lot of just kind of being deeply enmeshed in the React Native community for a while. I think that's plenty about me for now. So I'm going to actually hand it over to Robin and ask Robin, what's your kind of story getting into coding, getting into React Native itself? How did this all come to be?
Yeah. So I would say the first line of code that I ever wrote was Hello World in C++, because I decided to take the one computer science class that my liberal arts college offered, which was programming in C++. That was the first time in my life I actually was excited to go home and do my homework. And you could say I got bit by the coding bug, but unfortunately I was at a school that did not offer a computer science major. So I finished out my math degree and went to work for a paper company. Yes, Dunder Mifflin jokes.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
I've heard them all.
Did you have to deal with Toby and HR and everything, or?
The works. Yep, exactly what you'd imagine. I worked for a paper company for a while. The opportunity arose for me to do some playing around with VBA and macros, and I actually built a tool in Excel that hooked into their Oracle database. Wrote a lot of SQL, but realized I kind of didn't know what I was doing. And I wanted someone to sort of teach me how to program like a professional does. So I quit my job and I went to Epicodus, which is a code school here in Portland. And I learned Rails and I got an internship, and the rest is history. I did Rails for about 3 years. Lots of back-end microservices, and then decided I wanted to move on from that particular company and got hired at Infinite Red. They promised me I would get to do Elixir, but that didn't really work out. Jamin said, "Hey, we really need you to build React Native. Can you learn how to do that?" And I did, and I've been building React Native ever since. So that was about three and a half years ago that I started React Native.
Maybe eventually we'll get back to Elixir. That would be fun. But it seems like all the energy's on the React Native side at this point.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I've really enjoyed getting to sort of build front end and back end, since the mobile app is sort of the whole stack. So I've really enjoyed doing it.
And I think would you say that your background, having done back end with Rails, has helped you in your front end stuff? Knowing kind of when you're connecting to backend services, APIs, et cetera?
Oh, absolutely. Especially, we've had a couple clients who were still kind of in the process of building their API, and I've been able to help them sort of define what their API should look like from the perspective of the consumer of that API, and also with the perspective of knowing how to build an API. So it's been really good to have sort of both sides of the equation.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, thanks, Robin. And I'm going to move on to Harris here. Harris, you live, by the way, I forgot to mention, I live just north of Portland, Oregon, in Washington State, in Southwest Washington State, which is currently covered in a thick blanket of smoke from fires just east of us. Robin is also covered by that same thick blanket, I think.
Yeah, we've got the eerie yellow sky.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty crazy here. So Robin is just west of Portland in Beaverton, Oregon, which is like the most Oregon town name ever, Beaverton.
Yes, it is.
We do have beavers here. And also, Harris is over in Montreal. So I hope there's no fires over in that area. But Harris, tell us kind of how you got into coding, and then specifically about your React Native experience, and anything else about your background that you want to share.
Sure. So I got into coding because when I was younger, I used to play a lot of browser-based games. Specifically, I used to play like MMORPG called Darkthrone. It's like just this like RPG game on the browser, and I actually just like wanted to cheat in the game because they had this like button that you had to click 300. Yeah, like so you would like build population in the game, and you have to click this button 350 times a day to build population. And when you have multiple accounts, it's not really feasible to actually just like click it with a mouse. So I don't know if any of you know Grease Monkey, but yeah. So I started with Grease Monkey actually. So it's like just scripting, like really being a script kiddie and grabbing like whatever I could find, putting it together. And then I started building my own scripts again to keep cheating in the game. And eventually I went to high school in Toronto actually, and I joined like a computer science club. And someone actually pitched me to build like the website for the club for like $500. It's like the crappiest website I've ever built, but I couldn't believe that I was going to get paid for it. And after that, I decided that, university wasn't really working out for me. Just like Robin, like I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing still. So I literally went to New York. I went to a boot camp called Full Stack Academy. Actually, I begged my dad to fund it. I didn't have the money. It was like pretty expensive. There was no ISA models like they have today. So,
right.
I think it was like 20 grand or something. So I just begged my dad. I'm like, and honestly, it was the best investment ever. Like the rest was history. So, and
did your dad think it was the best investment ever? That's the big question.
No, actually, it's funny you say that because I recently spoke to him, and I don't think he realizes how much that investment paid off to this day.
Oh yeah,
right. Like to him, it was like, okay, like what is my son doing now? Like whatever.
Well, I can say it's pretty similar with my dad because he bought a computer back in 1992 or something like that. And he was going to use it for his business, his excavation company. And little did he know that much bigger impact, because he didn't end up using it for his business, was really on his son. So pretty similar idea there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like out of all the money he spent on my education, I don't think he realized how much this one specifically compounded. And then I started doing React Native and loved it. And I just love I love the whole all-around aspect, client side, server side, and working with you guys, which has been great. So
yeah, that's awesome. I should mention that Robin works for Infinite Red as a software engineer, of course, and then Harris has been freelancing with us. And Aditi, so tell us your background and how you got into coding. Are you the one person here who has a computer science degree?
Yeah.
And then also how you got into React Native.
Family, if I didn't have a degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Requirement for us. So yeah, just like you, Jamin, I was interested in just computer science and code even as a small kid. And back in India, when I was even in elementary school, we had like basic computer classes as a part of our curriculum. And I think the first thing I learned was Logo. There's like a small turtle that just you need to move the turtle around with the code. So that was my first programming language, followed by, I think, Basic. And at that time, my dad thought, okay, my daughter seems to be interested in computers. I'm going to take her to this class called IT Kids. It was this really cool new computer course class I had to go after school. And I was the only girl there, and everybody else was just boys. And that's kind of how it's been for me until today. I don't see a lot of women around where I work. So yeah, that's kind of what I started with as a kid. And I did get interested as I grew up. So I did my bachelor's in computer science. And I came here to Lawrence, Kansas in 2010 and did my master's in computer science. And at that time, I always liked teaching. So I started teaching I was a TA for a few courses during that time, which was mostly C++, Java. And there was one course back then, which was Android programming, and that they gave us all fancy tablets, and the students got 1, 2 free tablets, which was nice. So it was kind of cool and new, and we were like learning how to do like animations and stuff with Java, and I was teaching that course. So started that way, and then I started my real first job in 2012. I worked for a pretty big healthcare company here in Kansas City. I was there for 4 years, did plenty of things, did C++, Java, and eventually got to JavaScript. And it was mostly a full stack position there. Around 4 years, I realized that, I was doing the same thing over and over again. And I didn't get the big picture because I was like, it's like 20,000 people in the company. So I just wanted a change where I could, bring in more impact to a smaller company. So I moved to a small startup called Redivus Health, which just started then. And we were only like 5 of us back then. And I was one of the first engineers. And we were like, okay, what do we do? What are we building? We were going to build a healthcare app. And it was a mobile app, which had to work on both iOS and Android. And at that time, our CEO is a doctor. So he was like, not sure what is a, tech stack we're going to pick. And ultimately, we picked React Native, which was, up and coming. And we knew it was a big risk, but we didn't really have enough money to invest in both iOS and native Android developers. So like, okay, I guess we all know JavaScript and we're going to do React Native. And it was brand new. So that's how I got into React Native. And it's been 4 years. And in this 4 years, I've started, really getting into React Native, JavaScript, React, just the front-end community. I just moved away from being a full stack developer to like a front-end developer, and also interested in GraphQL and things like that. And I started speaking at conferences, just talking about React Native. And that's where I met Jamin.
Yeah, that's right. At Chain React. Was it 2019 or 18?
Last year. Yeah, 2019.
It was last year. Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome.
So met the chain at Chain React. I met all the Infinite Red, the community, and started speaking at conferences, doing courses for Pluralsight, and started doing a lot of blogging. So yeah, the last year I actually did start a company called Surya Consulting. I'm the only employee. And I offer all my teaching services. I do some mentoring, blogging, and all that stuff. So it's been good. It's been a good ride for me, the last 8 years working. I went from a big company to a small company to even starting my own company, and just hopefully keep going. So yeah, that's great. It's great to have your experience here. It's a very wide experience because you've done education. You've obviously worked for bigger companies as well as smaller startups, and just having another entrepreneur in the group is helpful too for that perspective.
Yeah, the rest of us don't really understand the pain that Jamin goes through every day.
I think the biggest pain is like the legal and the tax and all those stuff.
Oh, man.
Yeah, even if it's like a one-person company, I'm like, oh my gosh.
We could probably do a whole episode on that, not to like have Robin and Harris like not have, but I feel like there are probably a lot of people in our audience at React Native Radio who do own their own consultancies or their own startups, and they do go through a lot of those types of pains.
Yeah, I actually recently started, very recently, I incorporated, so I'm starting to go through these pains now.
Okay, yeah, and that's you're doing it in Canada, so a different country than us, but there are a lot of very, very similar things no matter where you are.
Same ideas. It's just like to optimize for taxes. But then you start realizing that there's all these tricks you can do. Like I got this like really creative accountant who told me that, and it's important to say creative accountant because most accountants usually are not creative. Whereas like,
should you be saying this publicly, Harris? That's the big question.
I mean, I told him I want to do everything the right way, but apparently you can.
Nice save. Yeah. I like it. So let's kind of talk about the acquisition of React Native Radio. This, I've listened to the podcast. I've been on the podcast as a guest. I've been on the podcast as a co-host. But we've been looking as Infinite Red. We're deeply embedded in the React Native community. For those of you who don't know who Infinite Red is, I'm sure plenty do. We put on Chain React, which is the biggest, actually, I think the only React Native focused tech conference in the US that happens every non-COVID year in July. Really missed this past year getting together with everybody.
2021.
Right, 2021. I'm very, very hopeful that we can do it in 2021. And then we also do, like, we manage the biggest newsletter, which has, I don't know, 11 or 12,000 subscribers. It's a great newsletter, by the way. Go to, I think it's reactnativenewsletter.com. We'll put it in the show notes. We also do a lot of open source, where we have several people involved in the React Native core team. We do Ignite, which is the biggest React Native boilerplate out there by quite a wide margin, and probably the most active in terms of development. We also have Reactatron, which is a desktop app that allows you to debug React and React Native apps, although it's primarily used for React Native apps at this point. It's also integrated with Flipper. Facebook asked us to integrate it into Flipper when they did a relaunch of Flipper, which is another desktop debugging app. And so that integration has gone really well. I think I'm missing some big stuff, but we've done, I mean, I don't know, I could keep going on. We have a lot of things, but we didn't have a podcast. We didn't have a podcast about this. We have a different podcast, Building Infinite Red. You can go to building.infinite.red for that. But that's more focused on the company. That is focused on Infinite Red as a company and how we built it. So it's really nice to have a technical podcast now. And so we had this opportunity to buy it from devchat.tv, and we did that. And I think that for us, it was just kind of like continuing to reaffirm our investment in the React Native community. Of course, we're a consultancy. So as people hear about us, then they'll recommend us to their bosses or their friends, saying, hey, if you need some React Native help, then this is a company that is really deeply invested in it. We definitely are. We do some React Web for sure, but we're most known for our React Native consulting. So I'd like to ask everybody here, what are your expectations now that we're doing a relaunch of React Native Radio? What are your expectations going forward for the podcast? I'm going to start with Harris, and I'm going to ask what types of things are you interested in us covering? What do you think? How do you think this is going to go going forward?
Personally, my expectations are more around just getting more connected to the community. Like, I know we have the Infinite Red community Slack, but I do think that I feel personally like I haven't really participated much in sort of the React Native community. I sort of just focus on my work, and I'd like to change that. And also, one of my personal goals is to contribute more to open source and just get more. In terms of the podcast itself, I'm hoping that, we can not only cover technical stuff, but even like just React Native adoption all around the world, where there's businesses. Like, a good example is the Canadian government is actually using React Native for their COVID-19 tracking.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
So that's cool.
I think I looked at the code, and they were actually using Reactatron.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love seeing that, and I agree with you, Harris. Like, getting more connected with the community is definitely a goal of mine. Aditi, what about you? Like, what do you see us accomplishing with the podcast, and what are your goals for it?
Very similar. I love engaging with the community too, and I see this as an opportunity to talk to other React Native experts. And as Harris mentioned, learn about other businesses that are adopting React Native, how they're using it, what do they like about it, what do they not like about it. And, being a co-contributor yourself, you can take that feedback too and, improve React Native. Also, with the pandemic going on, it's kind of been like a shutdown for me with the society. And I'm a pretty extroverted person, so I like to talk. So I see this as an opportunity to talk to more people with shared interests, learn about React Native, and share our experiences together. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's awesome. Definitely echo that myself. And Robin, same question to you.
Well, of course, I'll echo what Harris and Aditi said about the community. But on a lighter vein, Jamin probably knows that I'm the type of person who, if it's not broken, why fix it? And so I tend to get very entrenched in hey, this version of React Native is working. Why why upgrade? And so like maybe not know like all of the new features that are coming out, and this will be a great opportunity to sort of keep up with the new exciting features that are coming out in React Native, and maybe new exciting libraries. But yeah, it'll give me a great chance to keep up with things.
Absolutely. I'm definitely in there too. Even though I'm somewhat immersed in it, because I don't do it every day, my job is very different. This allows me to kind of connect in at a different level. And I would also say, just answering for myself, I'm really interested in bringing a more diverse hosting group and also guests to the podcast. And I think there are a lot of interesting guests out there. Some from within Infinite Red who never get a chance to really talk. From many without or outside of Infinite Red. People, you hear the same voices over and over and over on podcasts, and I want to break out of that a bit. Not that we won't have people on that are relatively popular in the community, but also have a lot of people on that, people haven't heard of and haven't heard their stories and their perspectives. And lastly, I love talking shop. So this is like my favorite part of the week here. Just getting a chance to sit down with a panel and chat about, React Native for an hour or however long we do it. So yeah, this is definitely something I'm very much looking forward to. Let me pivot into our secondary topic here, the state of React Native. Robin, I'm going to ask you, what do you see? I mean, you've been working in React Native for how long now? 3 years?
3.5 years now.
3.5 years. So over that time, there's been a lot of change in both the community as well as the technology stack itself. What do you see? Are you optimistic about React Native? Like, what do you see as the current state of React Native?
Oh, I'm absolutely optimistic. I mean, when I first started doing React Native, I wasn't at the very, very bleeding edge. I think I came in right around version like 40, 30, like 38, 40, somewhere around there. Yep. So it was somewhat established, but it was still like every release had some pretty major bugs, and it still kind of felt like it was finding its footing, and it definitely doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like it works solidly, and you can pretty much expect that a major release isn't going to break core
knock on
features.
Wood. Yep.
Knock on wood, yeah. So yeah, knock on wood. But it definitely feels like the technology itself and the features are much more stable, and you just see a lot more companies using it, like big name companies. Like That's a good indicator.
Yeah, along those lines, I've just gotten, during the pandemic, I got into a new game with my son, new computer game. He's 15, and we play games together. And we got into, well, it's not a new game. It's been around since 1999, but it's called Age of Empires 2. It's been around forever. And I'd never played it before. So I started playing it in March, and I downloaded an app for, it's called AOE 2 Companion. And it's written in React Native. It's pretty awesome. Just, random stuff like that. You just like a different interest and you run into this technology. Aditi, you've been doing this as well for a long time, React Native. You've been since just about the beginning of,
I think so, yeah, about 4 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. So how has it kind of changed, and what's the state of it right now?
I agree with Robin here. Back then, every single upgrade was a breaking change, and it would kind of scare us. Do we really need to do this upgrade right now? Yeah. But we had to, because a lot of things would get deprecated. Some navigation libraries would just change completely. The APIs would change and things like that. But now, 4 years later, I really think, although we're not on version 1, it's a pretty stable framework for building mobile apps. Things have matured in the React Native community as well. Lots of open source libraries are out there as a part of the React Native community. And I think it's going pretty strong. And, lots of startups, lots of companies use React Native. Also, as React keeps growing as well, 4 years ago, what React was versus what it is today, it's grown a lot as well. A lot of React developers are now becoming React Native developers as well. They're just wearing both hats. So things like functional components, hooks, and, just moving away from complex logic like lifecycle methods and all of that has helped new developers. And as far as I've seen, web developers seem to really enjoy going with React Native, like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see a trend where React Native is a chance for web developers to start building native and less of a chance for native developers to learn JavaScript. I think companies are seeing the benefit of sort of repurposing some of their web team to iterate on native really quickly. And I think that the issues that companies like Airbnb saw were native teams trying to move to JavaScript rather than taking existing JavaScript developers and having them build native apps.
Yeah, I've seen that trend as well, because even at conferences, I usually ask the audience, when I talk about React Native, how many of you are native developers and how many of you are, web developers? And almost always everyone who attends my talk would be a web developer, or they just got into React Native. It never pulls in native developers at all.
Yeah, definitely been the case. And I actually think that that's a challenge for the React Native community myself. I think that it would be nice to bring in more native developers to make it a kind of a welcoming environment for native developers. Because I actually think we need both. Having the web developer side is great, but we also need the native side for people who aren't afraid to just dive in to the native code and write some Objective-C or Java.
I'd love to see a Objective-C and Kotlin or Objective-C and Java for React Native developers course or tutorial. I'd love to see a lot more of those.
I agree, because every time we open up like Xcode or something, I'm like, why am I doing this right now?
So this is definitely a very keen interest of mine. I actually have in the Infinite Red Academy, which is another thing that we do. We have some courses there. I actually have a draft course right now called Native Development for React Native Developers.
Oh, wow. What a coincidence.
Yes, what a coincidence. Thanks, Robin. The biggest problem for me has just been finding time to work on it. I really am interested in it. I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of really cool stuff that we can do. I will give a shout out. There's a great talk on Xcode by Orda Thoreau. I actually don't know how to say his last name, to be honest. He just goes by Orda online, ORTA. And he's one of the most prolific open source developers you can find out there. And he gave a talk at React Native EU in Poland last year about Xcode, and it's fantastic. I think you should absolutely watch it. You will learn so much about what's going on. And it's not like super, super deep dive stuff. It's more like, what is this panel? Why is it here? What's its purpose? Like, how do you navigate around in here? By the end of his talk, I was like, Xcode's not scary. It was like, okay, I get it, And so definitely go check that out. We'll try to put a link to it in our show notes as well. Harris, I don't think we've hit you yet on this. Where do you see the state of React Native currently? What's it like, and how do you see it going forward?
I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you guys said. I think you've touched on everything. Personally, from my experience, one thing that I did notice is that, like, other than, the big companies, now it's hard not to, you're seeing all the up and coming startups, all the new companies that have like 3 founders and they just got funded and they just got into YC. Like, React Native has become their first choice. Whereas before it was like, yeah, you had Airbnb at first, and then you had like Walmart, and, later Airbnb dropped it. But now React Native has really started becoming a first choice rather than a secondary choice for a lot of these companies. And honestly, when I first started playing with React Native, I thought it was just a toy. Now I don't remember the last time I did a React web project was actually pretty recent. It was one of like Infinite Red client. But before that, it's been a while, since I've touched web. It's just been React Native. And I'd love to see that course, Jamin. I'm going to watch that video. I definitely want to improve my native skills. So
for sure. Yeah.
I've also noticed from the perspective of working with for a consultancy that, we're always having to sell our stack to clients. And it used to be that we had to really sell, hey, why are you using this cutting edge technology? Can we trust it? And we don't really have to do that as much anymore. Like, A lot of our clients are already familiar with it, and we have a lot more companies to point to saying, like, look at all these companies that are using this technology. It's pretty reliable, and having Facebook behind it helps a lot too. But yeah, we don't really have to convince clients that it's safe.
Yeah, totally, Robin. I 100% agree. I do our technical sales, and these days, if there is a question, it's usually very easily answered with, obviously Facebook's using it, but not just Facebook. Microsoft is literally rewriting Microsoft Office, from what I understand, the whole Office suite in React Native. And so that's a big deal. Like, everybody's used Office for years and years and years. For them to trust such an important part of their product suite to this technology is a big vote of confidence. Also, I do think that in terms of a state of React Native, there is more competition than ever. We also have Flutter, which is a very good platform or framework out of Google. And there's also, just recently, Kotlin multi-platform mobile was announced. And so what's kind of interesting is that React Native is actually kind of being seen as more the safe choice out of all of these. As good as Flutter is, which it is very, very good, the web story of React Native is just so good, because like React is the biggest web framework, front-end framework out there, I'm pretty sure, by a pretty wide margin. And so you have so many, resources, third-party libraries, programmers available to work in React. And we've had people get productive from React to React Native in just a few weeks' time. It doesn't take much to get them productive. And that's a big deal for companies. Even if Flutter is better for mobile, which that's arguable. I think that would be a good episode by itself. But even if it was, they just can't compete on the web side of things. There is Flutter for web, but it's not like anybody's like, hey, we're using Flutter on web, I guess maybe we should use Flutter on mobile too. That's just not how it works. Where with React and React Native, that happens all the time.
And I think learning Dart is a problem too.
Yeah,
I don't
Dart,
know
the
how
language.
hard or easier it is. So.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's also like, for me, I'm doing Swift right now, and it's not just the language, right? It's like the mental model. Like, when I opened Xcode, like having to do MVVM, the way like the view and the controller tied together, it's just having to rethink in that way versus like when we use Redux or MobX or like a unidirectional data flow. That's also what makes it hard, more than the language, I would say, actually.
For sure. Yeah, there's a different mentality on that side. Although they're learning from React, which is kind of interesting with Swift UI and now Jetpack Compose on the Android side. They're starting to take some of the best ideas from those things and apply them over there. But, there's a lot of legacy baggage on both sides when it comes to those things. I think we'll kind of wrap up now. I'm really excited to have all four of us, I should say, doing this podcast. I'm very, very interested in seeing what we do next. I think that there's going to be some fun stuff. Of course, this, because we purchased the podcast, you're going to be hearing Infinite Red's name a lot. But if you are interested in sponsoring the podcast and helping support us, get in touch with me, Jamin at infinite.red. Where can people find you online? Aditi, what's your Twitter handle?
It's at Aditi Ravi. It's ADHITHIRAVI.
Perfect. And Robin, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Robin_Hines, and that's with an E on the end, not like the ketchup.
Not like the ketchup, yes. When you announced your daughter, didn't you put little Heinz ketchup bottles?
Yes. When we announced that we were having our daughter, we had a large Heinz ketchup bottle and a medium-sized Heinz ketchup bottle, and then a little tiny, I don't know, I think it was like a restaurant souvenir. I don't know where it came from, but we had a really tiny Heinz ketchup bottle, and so it was
super cute. Yeah. And Harris, what's yours?
It's Brunostmann. It's BRUNOSTMANN.
Got it. And then you can find me on Twitter at Jamin Holmgren, JAMONHOLMGREN. And I'm pretty active on there. Happy to engage with people, on Twitter. Jamin
likes to do Twitter instead of work.
Calling me out just like that. Wow. It's
you
true.
You can tell
though.
I'm secure in my employment.
Exactly. You can see what kind of job this is. But it's true. I justify it though, Robin. It's networking, quote unquote. Can you see the air quotes? But do make sure to subscribe to our podcast. We're on all the major podcasting platforms. It's the podcast is called React Native Radio. In future episodes, we're going to add a new section. We're not going to do it this time, but there's going to be a new section called Weird Bugs. So we're going to be talking about weird bugs that we've encountered in our React Native. As we're working with React Native, there are plenty of weird bugs when you're working with React Native. So this will be kind of a fun one, and I'm really looking forward to that as well. So thanks everybody for being here with us today, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.